The American dream always looked different in my imagination. I never pictured myself here, in a meticulously planned suburban development where individuality went to die, suffocated by beige paint and bureaucratic red tape. Maple Grove Estates wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a carefully constructed illusion of perfection, a place where conformity was the highest virtue and personal expression was a punishable offense. When I first moved in, everything seemed too good to be true. And, as I would soon learn, it absolutely was. My name is David Chen, 38 years old, a software engineer who had spent years saving for this moment. After a decade of cramped city apartments and endless rental agreements, I finally had my own home. The house was nothing spectacular. A modest 2,500 square foot craftsman-style home with a small workshop in the back and just enough yard to feel like I had some breathing room. I'd spent months renovating, personalizing every inch to make it truly mine. Maple Grove Estates marketed itself as an exclusive community with amenities that seemed straight out of a real estate brochure. A community pool with cabana service, a state-of-the-art fitness center, walking trails, and quarterly community events. The initial buy-in was steep, $75,000 just to enter the community, on top of the house price. But I was young, ambitious, and believed in investing in my future. The first few months were a honeymoon period. Neighbors smiled and waved. Weekend barbecues felt like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. I met Mark Thompson, a retired Marine who lived 2 doors down, and Sarah Rodriguez, a local elementary school teacher who hosted book clubs and seemed to know everyone. Then I met Karen Whitmore. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was a force of nature. A retired high school principal with steel gray hair, always pulled into a perfect bun. Karen looked like she could silence a room with a single glance. Her husband, Robert, sat on the city council, a detail that would become increasingly relevant as my battle with the HOA unfolded. The HOA handbook was a marvel of bureaucratic excess-172 pages of regulations covering everything from lawn maintenance to the acceptable shade of white for exterior paint. I'd read through most of it when I first moved in, thinking it was just standard legal mumbo-jumbo. How naive I was. My first interaction with Karen came during the monthly HOA meeting. I'd brought some ideas about community gardening, a shared space where residents could grow vegetables, maybe teach kids about sustainable living. It seemed like a wholesome suggestion. Karen's response was a masterclass in passive-aggressive dismissal. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice as sharp as her pressed blazer, "while your enthusiasm is noted, we have carefully curated this community's aesthetic for decades. Random vegetable patches would create unnecessary visual disruption." Visual disruption. Those were her actual words. The other board members, a collection of retirees and middle management types, nodded in robotic agreement. It was my first glimpse behind the curtain, my first real understanding that Maple Grove was less a community and more a tightly controlled fiefdom. I didn't know it then, that that meeting was the beginning of a war. A war fought with certified letters, obscure bylaws, and an increasingly ridiculous series of regulations designed to strip away every ounce of individual expression. The terracotta plant pots were my first act of rebellion. Small, almost insignificant. 2 simple clay containers with bright red geraniums, placed carefully on my front porch. They would become the first battlefield in a conflict that would consume the entire neighborhood. Little did I know how far Karen Whitmore was willing to go to maintain her version of suburban perfection. The first official warning arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, sealed in an official Maple Grove Estates envelope that seemed to radiate bureaucratic menace. I remember standing in my kitchen, coffee mug in hand, my dog ranger watching me with that mix of curiosity and mild concern dogs get when their owners start muttering to themselves. Section 4.2. Landscape and Exterior Decorative Elements. The letter began in a font that looked like it had been designed specifically to induce mild panic. Violation notice. Unauthorized decorative installation and aesthetic deviation. My crime. Those 2 terracotta plant pots with geraniums. The fine was $250, with an additional daily penalty of $50 for each day the violation remained unresolved. I read the letter 3 times, convinced I must be misunderstanding something. Who issues a $250 fine for flower pots? I called the HOA office, navigating through an automated system that seemed designed to test the limits of human patience. After 27 minutes on hold, I know because I started a timer out of pure spite, I finally reached Karen Whitmore's assistant. The pots are not on the approved decorative element list, the assistant explained in a monotone voice that suggested she had repeated this explanation countless times. They do not match the community's approved color palette and exterior design guidelines. I'm sorry, I said, trying to keep my voice level. But what exactly is the approved color palette for flower pots? There was a brief pause. Neutral earth tones. Beige, taupe, or soft gray. Your terracotta pots are considered a visual disruption. Visual disruption. There was that phrase again. My next move was to attend the monthly HOA meeting. The community center where these gatherings took place was a testament to suburban architectural blandness, top walls, neutral carpeting, and an air of quiet desperation that hung heavy in the room. Karen sat at the head of the table, her posture so rigid it could have been used to measure perfect right angles. The other board members, a mix of retired professionals and part-time bureaucrats, looked like a council of suburban overlords. Mr. Chen, Karen began, her voice as crisp as her blazer, these pots represent a clear violation of our carefully maintained community standards. I pulled out the photographs I'd taken. The geraniums were vibrant but perfectly contained. The pots were clean, well maintained. Can you explain how these constitute a violation? I asked. Karen's response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic deflection. The terracotta color is not within our approved palette. The placement disrupts the visual uniformity we've worked decades to maintain. Mark Thompson, sitting in the back of the room, let out a soft snort. I'd later learn he'd been fighting his own battles with the HOA, but in that moment, his small act of solidarity was my only comfort. So, I said, trying to maintain my composure, you're telling me I can't have red clay pots with flowers on my own property? Not without prior approval from the Aesthetic Review Committee, Karen replied, her smile a thin, razor-sharp line. The meeting became a surreal dance of bureaucratic nonsense. They presented me with a form, a 3-page document requiring detailed drawings, color swatches, and professional landscaping plans just to keep 2 flower pots on my own porch. As I left the meeting, the fine still hanging over my head, I realized this was about more than flower pots. This was about control. About stripping away every ounce of individual expression in the name of some twisted version of community harmony. Little did Karen know, I'm not someone who backs down easily. Those flower pots were just the beginning of my resistance. Ranger greeted me at home, tail wagging, blissfully unaware of the bureaucratic war that had just begun. I scratched behind his ears and made a promise. We weren't going anywhere. Not without a fight. The flower pot incident was just the beginning. Like a bureaucratic hydra, the Maple Grove Estates HOA seemed to sprout new, more ridiculous rules with each passing week. My first indication that this was going to be an all-out war came 3 weeks after the flower pot debacle. A new citation arrived, this time about my lawn. Not just any aspect of the lawn, the specific shade of green. Lawn chromatic variance violation, the letter proclaimed in bold, official-looking letterhead. Apparently, my grass was 0.5 shades darker than the approved turf spectrum, outlined in Section 7.3, subsection C of the HOA guidelines. The fine this time was $500. I wish I was joking. Mark Thompson, my retired Marine neighbor, was experiencing his own HOA nightmare. When I walked over to discuss our shared frustration, he was busy measuring the height of his flagpole, with a professional-grade measuring tape and a look of pure defiance. "They sent me a warning," Mark explained, holding up a certified letter. "Apparently, my American flag is 3 inches too tall and doesn't meet the approved display dimensions." "You're kidding," I said. He wasn't. Our other neighbor, Sarah Rodriguez, was fighting her own battle. The HOA had issued her a citation for excessive botanical diversity in her front yard. Her crime? Planting native wildflowers that didn't conform to the strictly manicured landscape design. They want me to replace my entire front garden with approved non-native ornamental grasses, Sarah told me, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. Apparently, my attempt to support local pollinators is a community aesthetic violation. The citations kept coming. A warning about my garbage cans being 2 inches too close to the street. Another about the unauthorized wind chimes hanging on my back porch. Each letter was more absurd than the last, each fine more punitive. I started documenting everything. Photographs, measurements, correspondence. I created a dedicated folder on my computer. What started as a minor annoyance was turning into a full-blown investigation. My background in software engineering kicked in. I began to see the HOA's actions not just as individual incidents, but as a systematic approach to community control. Each rule, each fine, was another thread in a larger tapestry of bureaucratic oppression. The breaking point came during the next monthly HOA meeting. I'd arrived early, my folder of documentation tucked under my arm. Mark sat beside me, Sarah in the row behind. We were no longer just individual homeowners. We were becoming a united front. Karen Whitmore presided over the meeting with her usual mix of condescension and rigid control. When it came time for open discussion, I raised my hand. "I'd like to discuss the recent citations," I said, my voice calm but firm. Karen's smile was a thin, razor-sharp line. "Mr. Chen, each citation is a result of carefully considered community standards." I pulled out my documentation. Photographs, measurements, comparative analysis of lawn colors, flagpole heights, garden compositions. I had turned their bureaucratic weapons against them. These citations are not about maintaining community standards, I argued. They're about control, about stripping away individual expression and personal freedom. The room went silent. Mark nodded beside me. Sarah's hand squeezed my shoulder in support. Karen's composure cracked, just for a moment. A micro-expression of rage and fear flickered across her face. We had struck a nerve. The war was just beginning, and for the first time, I realized we might actually have a chance of winning. The classic 1967 Ford Mustang had been my pride and joy long before I moved to Maple Grove Estates. Restored over 6 years with my late father, the car was more than just a vehicle. It was a memory, a connection to the most important person in my life. Every inch of chrome, every carefully selected part told a story of weekends spent in our garage, of a relationship built through patience, love, and a shared passion for automotive history. I'd always parked it in my driveway. Not on the street, not blocking anything, just sitting there, a testament to years of hard work and shared moments with my dad. The HOA saw it differently. The certified letter arrived on a Friday afternoon. Ranger, my golden retriever, watched me with that concerned look dogs get when their humans start muttering increasingly colorful expletives. VE Steel aesthetic violation. The letter screamed in bold, bureaucratic typography. Vintage vehicle deemed community visual disruptive element. They wanted the car removed. Completely. Within 72 hours. The reasoning was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive nonsense. The Mustang, they claimed, did not meet the aesthetic standards of Maple Grove Estates. Its metallic blue paint was too vibrant. Its classic lines disrupted the uniform vehicular presentation of the neighborhood. I called the HOA office, my hand gripping the phone so tightly I could feel my knuckles going white. "This is my personal property," I explained to the administrative assistant, trying to maintain composure. "Parked on my own driveway." "Mr. Chen," the assistant replied with robotic detachment, "Section 9.7 of the Community Guidelines clearly states that all vehicles must meet aesthetic and maintenance standards." When I demanded to speak with Karen Whitmore, the response was even more infuriating. "Ms. Whitmore will not take direct calls regarding violation notices." Mark Thompson, my retired Marine neighbor, came over as I was pacing my front yard. He'd heard about the latest HOA attack and brought over 2 cold beers. "They're trying to break you," Mark said, his voice a low growl. "Make you feel powerless." He wasn't wrong. This wasn't just about a car. This was about control. About stripping away every piece of personal identity, every memory, every connection to individuality. But the HOA wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The following Tuesday, a tow truck arrived. Not just any tow truck. A massive flatbed with Maple Grove Estates HOA logos plastered on its side. Karen Whitmore stood nearby, clipboard in hand, watching with a look of cold satisfaction. "Remove the vehicle immediately," she instructed the driver. "It violates community standards." Something inside me snapped. I stepped between the tow truck and my Mustang, my father's voice echoing in my mind. "Sometimes," he always said, "you have to draw a line in the sand." "This is my property," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "You will not touch this car." Karen's response was chilling. "We have the authority. The city council has approved our actions. You have 24 hours to comply, or we'll begin foreclosure proceedings." Foreclosure. Over a car. Over a memory. At that moment, I realized this was no longer about flower pots or lawn colors. This was a war, and I was done playing defense. Ranger sat beside me, a silent sentinel. The Mustang gleamed in the afternoon sun, a symbol of resistance against bureaucratic tyranny. They had no idea what was coming next. Software engineers are problem solvers. We don't just accept roadblocks, we find ways around them, through them, or straight over them. And Karen Whitmore had just presented me with the most interesting problem of my life. My home office became command central. Multiple monitors, color-coded sticky notes, and a conspiracy wall that would make a detective proud. I began to dig, not just into HOA regulations, but into the entire ecosystem of Maple Grove Estates. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Rodriguez, the elementary school teacher who'd been fighting her own battle with the HOA, showed up at my door with a manila envelope that would change everything. "I've been collecting documents," she said, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a determined spark in her eye. "My grandmother was a legal secretary. She taught me to never throw anything away." The documents were a goldmine. Buried within years of HOA meeting minutes and financial reports were inconsistencies that reeked of corruption. Construction contracts awarded without proper bidding. Unexplained expenses. Connections between HOA board members and local contractors that seemed more than coincidental. Mark Thompson added his own intelligence to our growing file. As a retired Marine, he approached this like a military operation. Intelligence gathering, he called it, producing copies of property records, tax documents, and city council meeting minutes. I used my software skills to create a database cross-referencing every piece of information. The picture that emerged was stunning in its complexity. Karen Whitmore's husband, Robert, sat on the city council. Their son owned a local landscaping company that had received nearly every HOA-approved landscaping contract for the past 5 years. The conflict of interest was blatant and potentially illegal. But we needed more than just documents. We needed exposure. I created a website. Maple Grove Truth became our platform, a carefully constructed repository of every HOA violation every questionable decision, every piece of evidence we'd gathered. I used my professional-grade cybersecurity skills to ensure it couldn't be taken down easily. The Facebook group was Sarah's idea. Maple Grove Homeowners United started with just the three of us. Within a week, we had over 200 members. Homeowners from not just our development, but surrounding communities began sharing their own HOA horror stories. Local investigative journalists started taking notice. A young reporter named Emma Carter reached out, her eyes lighting up when I showed her our documentation. "This is bigger than just one HOA," she told me during our first meeting. "This could be a systemic issue." We began collecting formal statements. Each homeowner who had been harassed, fined, or threatened came forward with their story. The pattern was unmistakable. A systematic approach of intimidation and control. The breaking point came when we discovered documents suggesting the HOA had been manipulating property valuations. By controlling every aspect of homeowner behavior, they were artificially maintaining property values and likely profiting in ways that skirted legal boundaries. Mark's military background proved invaluable. "We need a strategy," he said, spreading out our evidence on my dining room table. Not just a reaction, but a coordinated assault. Our plan took shape. We would 1. Compile a comprehensive report of HOA violations. 2. Contact state regulatory agencies. 3. Prepare for potential legal action. 4. Create public awareness. Ranger watched us from his bed, seemingly understanding the gravity of our mission. The dog had become an unexpected mascot of our resistance, often sitting quietly during our strategy sessions. Karen Whitmore and the HOA board had no idea what was coming. The fight was just beginning, and we were done playing defense. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning that felt electric with anticipation. Emma Carter's investigative piece ran on the front page of the local newspaper, with a headline that made my heart race. Maple Grove HOA. A system of systematic corruption revealed. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It laid bare every single inconsistency we'd uncovered: the nepotistic contract awards, the manipulated property valuations, the pattern of harassment against homeowners. Robert Whitmore's conflicts of interest were exposed in excruciating detail, complete with financial records and email chains that painted a damning picture. Within hours, our Maple Grove Truth website crashed from the traffic. The Facebook group exploded from 200 to over 1,500 members. Homeowners from across 3 counties began sharing similar stories, creating a groundswell of support we hadn't anticipated. The first sign of internal breakdown came during an emergency HOA board meeting. Mark, using a contact from his military days, managed to get us an audio recording. Karen's carefully constructed facade was cracking. "This is a witch hunt," she screamed, her trademark composure completely shattered. "We've maintained this community's standards for decades." But her board members were no longer unanimous. Tom Richardson, the longtime treasurer, spoke up. "Karen, we can't ignore these allegations. The evidence is too strong." The recording captured the sound of Karen's sharp intake of breath, the moment she realized she was losing control. State regulatory agencies began making inquiries. The City Council, previously a rubber stamp for the HOA's decisions, suddenly became very interested in conducting a thorough review of Maple Grove's practices. Robert Whitmore's political connections started to crumble. Colleagues distanced themselves, sensing the impending scandal. His son's landscaping company began losing contracts as businesses feared association with the emerging controversy. Our strategy was deliberate and calculated. We weren't just fighting. We were dismantling a system of control piece by piece. Sarah Rodriguez's research proved particularly devastating. She'd uncovered a series of emergency meetings where significant decisions were made without proper documentation, a clear violation of HOA bylaws. Each piece of evidence was meticulously cataloged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. The local real estate community started to take notice. Property values in Maple Grove began to fluctuate as the scandal grew. Potential buyers became wary, and existing homeowners started to worry about their investments. We received an unexpected ally in Linda Martinez, a junior board member who had always been uncomfortable with Karen's extreme methods. She became our inside source, providing additional documentation that further exposed the HOA's corrupt practices. "I've been waiting years to speak up," Linda told me during a clandestine meeting at a local coffee shop. "But I was always too afraid of Karen's retaliation." Her testimony would prove to be a turning point. The legal groundwork was being laid. Mark, with his military connections, helped us connect with a pro bono legal team specializing in community association law. They saw our case as more than just a local dispute. It was a potential landmark case about homeowner rights. As the pressure mounted, Karen's responses became more erratic. Threatening letters went out to homeowners, but they no longer carried the same weight. Where once people would have cowered, now they were fighting back, sharing every communication, documenting every interaction. Rangers sat by my side as I reviewed our growing file of evidence, seemingly understanding the significance of what we were accomplishing. The dog had become an unlikely mascot of our resistance, a silent witness to our carefully orchestrated takedown. Karen Whitmore and the HOA board had no idea what was coming next. The real battle was just beginning. The county courthouse was packed. I had seen tech conferences with fewer people, but never a local housing board hearing that drew this kind of crowd. Every seat was filled, with people standing in the back and lining the hallways. Maple Grove residents, local media, state investigators, all waiting for the moment of reckoning. Karen Whitmore arrived precisely at 9:00 a.m., her trademark power suit pressed within an inch of its life. But something was different. The usual razor-sharp confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle determination that looked like it might shatter at any moment. Our legal team, led by Michael Chen, no relation, a bulldozer of a lawyer with a reputation for taking down corrupt systems, laid out our case with surgical precision. Each piece of evidence was a calculated blow. Financial records showing kickback schemes, meeting minutes revealing systematic harassment, email chains exposing conflicts of interest that went deeper than anyone had imagined. Robert Whitmore, Karen's husband, sat nearby, his city council connections suddenly looking more like liabilities than assets. His son's landscaping company was already under investigation, contracts suspended, reputation in tatters. The state housing investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Rodriguez, listened with an expression that could freeze lava. Her preliminary report, leaked to the press the week before, had already painted a damning picture of the Maple Grove HOA's practices. "This is more than a simple case of overreach," Patricia had told reporters. "This is a systematic pattern of harassment, financial manipulation, and abuse of power." Mark Thompson sat beside me, his Marine training evident in how he sat, perfectly still, but coiled with potential energy. Sarah Rodriguez was on my other side, her teacher's notebook filled with meticulously documented evidence. Karen took the stand, and it was like watching a dam about to burst. "We were protecting community standards," she insisted, her voice losing its trademark steel with each question. Michael Chen dismantled her testimony piece by piece, exposing lie after lie. The most devastating moment came when Linda Martinez, the board member who had become our inside source, testified. She detailed internal conversations, unofficial meetings, the constant pressure to conform to Karen's vision of the perfect community. "It was never about the community," Linda said, her voice breaking. "It was about control, about Karen's personal vision of suburban perfection." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. One by one, homeowners took the stand. The woman fined for native plants. The veteran threatened for his flag. The family harassed for a child's bicycle left out too long. Each story was a hammer blow against the HOA's facade. My own testimony, focused on the systemic nature of the harassment. The Mustang, the flower pots, the endless, petty citations designed to break the spirit of homeowners. This wasn't just about rules, I explained. This was about stripping away individual identity, about creating a community where conformity was the only acceptable form of expression. As the hearing progressed, I watched something remarkable happen. The HOA board members began to crack. Tom Richardson, the longtime treasurer, requested immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Robert Whitmore's political allies began distancing themselves. Karen Whitmore, once the undisputed queen of Maple Grove Estates, looked smaller with each passing hour. The woman who had terrorized an entire community was being reduced to her true size, just a bully with a clipboard. Ranger waited for me at home, a silent reminder of why we fought this battle. This wasn't just about winning. It was about preserving the right to live, to express ourselves, to call a piece of land our own. The final ruling was yet to come, but we all knew this was the beginning of the end. 3 months after the hearing, Maple Grove Estates was unrecognizable. The state's ruling was comprehensive and brutal. The entire HOA board was dissolved. Karen Whitmore and her husband Robert faced multiple legal actions, civil penalties, potential criminal charges for misuse of municipal power, and a complete ban from serving on any community board or municipal committee. Their son's landscaping company was dissolved, its business licenses revoked. The web of corruption they'd carefully constructed for decades came apart like a cheap sweater, unraveling thread by thread. A new, democratically elected HOA board was established. The first order of business: dismantling the most oppressive rules and creating a transparent governance system. Mark Thompson, with his military precision and sense of community, was elected as the board's first president. My classic Mustang sat proudly in the driveway, a symbol of our resistance. The 2 terracotta pots with geraniums were back in their original spot, now a local landmark of defiance. The financial impact was significant. The state mandated a full audit of all fines and penalties collected over the past decade. Homeowners received substantial refunds, some getting checks for thousands of dollars that had been wrongfully collected. Sarah Rodriguez's native plant garden became a community showcase. What was once considered a violation was now celebrated as an example of environmental responsibility. Local schools began using it as an educational resource about native ecosystems. Our Facebook group, Maple Grove Truth, transformed into a community resource. What started as a platform of resistance became a model for community engagement and oversight. The local media continued to follow the story. Emma Carter, the investigative reporter who first broke the story, won a prestigious journalism award. Her expose became a case study in local government accountability. But the real victory was more personal. At the first new community meeting, I looked around the room. Faces that had once been beaten down by years of harassment now showed something different: hope, pride, a sense of ownership that went beyond property lines. Linda Martinez, the former board member who had become our inside source, spoke about the importance of community over control. We lost sight of what a neighborhood should be, she told the gathered residents. A place of support, of individuality, of genuine connection. Ranger, my ever-present companion, seemed to understand the significance of our journey. He'd been there through every late-night strategy session, every moment of frustration and triumph. The state legislature even began drafting new regulations for homeowners associations, inspired by our case. What happened in Maple Grove would become a landmark moment in community governance. Karen Whitmore's final act of desperation came in the form of a desperate lawsuit, which was promptly dismissed with prejudice. Her once formidable network of connections had completely disintegrated. Our neighborhood became something special. Not because of uniformity, but because of diversity. People painted their houses colors they loved. Gardens bloomed with personality. Children's toys could sit on lawns without fear of citation. During the holiday season, we held a community celebration. Mark grilled, Sarah organized activities for the kids, and I brought out my dad's old classic car for the neighborhood kids to admire. The Mustang, once a point of contention, was now a symbol of our collective resistance. As I stood there, watching our community laugh and connect, I thought about the journey. We hadn't just fought an HOA. We'd fought for the right to be ourselves, to live without unnecessary fear, to create a true community. Ranger sat beside me, tail wagging, a silent witness to our victory. Sometimes, David really does beat Goliath.